As we prepare to finish our Daring to Hope journey, it's important that we recognize that life isn't simple. Often the circumstances of our dark clouds are not tame. One lament prayer will never be enough to fix things. Instead, we must keep turning to lament time and time again. But why? Well, it's because lament leads us to trust in God. It leads us to a place where we can experience and know God's grace and hope even as the dark clouds remain. Lament, as we've discovered, gives us a voice and a platform to turn to God, talk with Him in prayer, share our complaints, voice our protests, boldly ask for His help, and reaffirm our commitment to believe in His character and covenant promises. Lament, as Rebecca Eklund states, is ultimately how we endure, we trust, we wait, and we stand on the boundary between the old age and the new, and hope for things unseen. Yet whilst we wait on the day when all sorrows and pains will cease, and everything will be made new, we must choose and learn how to daringly trust in God's hope. To help us understand this final step in our formula for lament, we're going to revisit and briefly examine the final two verses of the psalm with which we began our journey in session 1, Psalm 13. In steps that are hopefully becoming more familiar to us all, we can see how in Psalm 13 David firstly turns to God and secondly expresses his complaints with 4 how long questions in verses 1 to 2. Having done that, we can see the third step in our formula for lament as David moves quickly to make his bold request for God's help to deliver him from the grip of his enemy in verses 3 to 4. And we can see how, having done these things, David makes a decisive turn to the final step in our lament journey, daring to hope or trust in God, with 3 affirmations of trust rooted deeply in God's character in verses 5 and 6. Let's explore each of these and their lessons for teaching us how we can continue to hope and trust in God today. Firstly, David states, "But I trust in your unfailing love." David finds the grounds for hope in God's unfailing love. The authors of the Lament Psalms knew all about God's unfailing love. They had heard about it and seen it in their own lives as God acted and repeatedly intervened to save His people in their day of trouble. Even if the dark clouds of their lives meant they couldn't see it or feel it at every moment, they knew deep down that God was still there and that God was still loyal to them and His covenant promises. It is this confidence in God's faithfulness which made it possible for David, Asaph, and the many others we have encountered on our journey to keep turning to God for help in their prayerful laments. But what about us? Secondly, David announces that my heart rejoices in your salvation. This second confidence statement in Psalm 13 verse 5 connects trust to rejoicing in God's ultimate redemption plan. All throughout the Bible, we see time and time again how God rescues His people. Despite the circumstances of their dark clouds, God had not forgotten, rejected, or abandoned His people. Even though they couldn't see the full trajectory of God's salvation being worked out in their lives, didn't mean that God wasn't with His children. The same is true for us today. In fact, on this side of the cross, we have an incredible advantage over figures like David in Psalm 13. An advantage that we wholeheartedly need to embrace. We know that the ultimate lament cry echoed by Jesus on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" led to the greatest moment of redemption. The darkness of the cross led ultimately to the glory and bright dawn light of an empty tomb. We know the full story of salvation. And in its own beautiful way, lament gives us the space and the language to not only trust in God's character and covenant, but the opportunity to rejoice in God's gracious salvation plan, even if, like David or the disciples at the foot of the cross, we can't see all the dots being connected. Finally, David declares that for as long as he lives, I will sing the Lord's praise, for He has been good to me. This final statement of trust in Psalm 13 brings David to the ultimate destination of his lament, a daring hope proclaimed in the offering of faith-filled worship. Though his situation hasn't necessarily changed, David's heart has been reoriented. Rather than remaining in complaint or protest, David has taken the next steps and boldly declared that he will choose to worship God for the goodness, grace, mercy, and unfailing love he has shown to him. Though we will soon have an opportunity to participate in these very practices of hoping and trusting in God ourselves, it bears saying that all throughout the Psalms of Lament, there is this consistent destination of trust. Yet each of our trust affirmations will perhaps look differently to one another's. Some of us may be full of confidence and eloquence as we express our own words. Some of us may choose to sing the song within our own hearts quietly. Still others of us may simply wish to rehearse the promises seen all throughout Scripture. Whichever it may be, God invites us. God invites you, amid all the pain and questions created by the dark clouds of our lives, to step out in trust and hope towards him today. Whether that is the smallest step or a giant leap doesn't matter. The important thing here is simply taking this step like David in Psalm 13 and choosing to worship God for the goodness, grace, mercy, and unfailing love he has shown and continues to pour out over us, no matter our story or circumstances.